Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hey, comics fam. Whether you are a longtime listener or a veteran catching the show today, all are welcome here. When we started this podcast, inclusion and diversity were at the forefront of what we wanted to cover and promote with it. So in June, we'll be celebrating Pride Month for our second year in a row, featuring an amazing group of queer creators and their projects. One of those projects is from our friends at Lifeline Comics. Following their success with By Visibility Still By, Harrowing, and Rainbow Canvas, Lifeline Comics is launching their newest queer anthology, Transphoria, a trans and non-binary anthology, on May the 30th. The 90-page graphic novel will contain 19 stories all about trans and non-binary experiences of gender euphoria, crossing all genres like slice of life, supernatural, romance, science fiction, anime, and beyond. Featuring a vibrant display of artistic styles and storytelling techniques, Transphoria is a testament to the creativity and talent of its contributors. From sci-fi striking stories to endearing romantic ventures, this graphic novel celebrates trans stories while delivering a powerful message of empowerment and affirmation. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can check it out. As always, thanks for listening and have a glorious Pride Month helping us celebrate. Y'all, Jimmy, the Chaos Goblin, strikes again. I should have known better than to mention I was working on my DC Universe meets Ravenloft hybrid D&D campaign on social media. My bad. He goes and tags a bunch of comics creators we know, and now I have to get it in gear and whip this campaign into shape so we can start playing. Another friend chimes in, "Are you going to make maps?" It's fair to say it's been a while since I put something together, so I guess? It was then that I discovered Arkenforge. If you don't know who Arkenforge is, they have everything you need to make your TTRPG more fun and immersive, allowing you to build, play, and export animated maps, including in-person Fog of War capability that lets your players interact with maps as the adventure unfolds while you, the DM, get the full picture. Now I'm set to easily build high-res animated maps, saving myself precious time and significantly adding nuance to our campaign. That's a win every day in my book. Check them out at arkenforge.com and use the discount code YETI5 to get $5 off. I'll drop a link in the show notes for you, and big thanks to Arkenforge for partnering with our show. I think I'm going to make Jimmy play a Goblin Warlock just to get even. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, your host for today's Comics Creator Chat, and we're kicking off my second year of Pride Month specific coverage today with a new guest on the show. I'm delighted to introduce comics illustrator and author Theo Parish on with me to discuss their new autobiographical graphic novel, Homebody, from Harper Alley. Theo, welcome to the show. You having a good week so far?
Yeah, I am. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I got a chance to read an advanced copy of Homebody, and I really enjoyed it. I did a quick check of Goodreads reviews, which is kind of, I don't know how big it is over there in the UK, but it's a big website in the US for such things. And there's over 400 reviews, and we're sitting at over 4.5 stars. So has to be considered a solid start here anyway. How are you feeling about now? Surprised, excited, with how everything's being received so far?
Yeah, pleasantly surprised, excited. It's kind of been a bit of a whirlwind journey for me. So it still sort of doesn't feel like it's really happening, even though the book is out and I can physically hold it.
Yeah. That's the nature of those things. Well, let's start with your comics journey to kind of give everyone a little bit of a background. I know you're a graduate of Norwich. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. There's no W in there, right? So Norwich University Arts. But I'm imagining comics was fairly foundational to you prior to that. Is that a safe statement?
Yeah, I've always read comics for sort of as long as I can remember. We have a set of comic strips here in the UK called the Beano, which has Dennis the Menace in it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that as much in the States, but yeah, that's kind of the foundational first kind of comics that I remember reading was getting the Beano every week. But yeah, I've always enjoyed reading comics. I actually studied, I didn't study illustration per se at university. I actually studied video game design.
Okay.
So I kind of left illustration for a little while, focusing more on designing for games. But what really inspires me and kind of binds all of it together is like just a love of storytelling in all of the different ways that you can tell stories. And at the moment, it's comics.
Okay. So you have designs to do video game stuff later on, or?
I would love to do video game stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, one day maybe. I would love to. I want to write more comics. I guess that's where my focus is at the moment. But I'm open to anything really.
Okay. Well, Homebody is a very positive narrative voice. Perhaps it's kind of my own recent experience bias and exposure bias, but many of the trans-specific stories that I've read recently kind of focus on trauma and working through it. And I'm by no means saying this looked easy, right? But it comes off as you got this, right? Like that's the overall sort of tone. Was that kind of your own experience, or just the best way you thought to kind of present this story?
Um, I really wanted to make something that was hopeful. Um, Obviously, I didn't want to stray too much into kind of that toxic positivity thing of like everything's fine,
Yeah.
because that's not the reality. But as you say, there are a lot of stories out there already that focus on maybe the harder things. And I think just in general, the kind of political climate that we're in at the moment, there is a lot of negativity, particularly surrounding trans identity. So I just really wanted this book to be a sort of positive light amongst some of the more negative things. Because, I mean, I try not to get bogged down in thinking about it all too much.
Sure.
But it does affect me. And I'm an adult. So I can't imagine how much kind of pressure and like what kind of effect that might have for someone who is sort of early teens and beginning to struggle with their identity or to question their identity. And so I really want to be a voice of saying, hey, like it might be hard, but it is possible to have a joyful and successful and happy existence as someone who is non-binary or trans. Because I think if you don't see people kind of queer people happily living their lives, you don't really know that that's possible for you. So I wanted to kind of be that person for someone.
Okay. Well, did you start out originally with kind of the reader in mind, or was it more of a cathartic, self-reflective exercise? Obviously, like these things tend to morph, right, as you go along.
Yeah.
But so it could be both. So.
Yeah, it's definitely both, and I think it's changed a little bit throughout the process. I think initially, so Homebody actually at the very beginning started as it was a poem that I wrote, really just to express my own feelings towards the relationship that I have with my body, and that's where the kind of metaphor for the difference between a house and a home, and finding some way to exist within yourself that feels more like home. And so in the beginning, it was just kind of, for me, really, it was a cathartic exercise of expressing those feelings. And so I wrote this poem, and then I realized that I could see some images that I thought went well with what I'd written. So I made just a short 4 or 5 panel comic, and I posted that online, not really expecting much to come of it. But it did sort of get some traction, and a lot of people seemed to identify with what I'd written. And I had some interest from literary agents here in the UK who asked me if I thought I could extend it into like a full graphic novel. So I worked with my agent to kind of make a plan for how we could make my story into more of a full-length graphic novel. So then I began to think about like who I was writing it for other than for me. And when I'm asked this question, it feels kind of cheesy to say, but I do think that I did write it for myself at that age. So if I had a time machine, I would love to go back in time and give it to, the 14-year-old me, because I think it's the kind of thing that I would have really benefited from reading.
Yeah, I get that all the time actually on interviews and in talking to queer creators is I wanted to make the book that I didn't have access to when I was that age. Constantly I hear that. So it makes a lot of sense for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's so great that we're seeing so many of those books now. Like there's so many more options for queer and trans stories. So it's amazing to see.
Yeah, and it's changing so fast. Like I'm amazed. Like we've just had this podcast like maybe 2.5 years at this point, and at the beginning of it, the landscape looked entirely different. I was asking entirely different questions, like, and we've had to march on, which is fantastic. I feel like we're in a better place.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, I've never seen cosplay personally as a liberator, but maybe that's because it doesn't appeal to me all that much. But kind of as a lifelong player of Dungeons and Dragons, which can do much the same thing. It's not a big leap between those two things. It seems like both were kind of pivotally to you along this journey. So, how are you introduced to them, and kind of what did they help you unlock?
I think they both sort of unlocked different parts of me slightly, but sort of in the same vein. Cosplay came into my life first. And yeah, I still remember very vividly the first comic book convention that I went to, and just the feeling of like walking into a space with that many people who were all like, we were all there for the same kind of reasons, and we all had the same sort, like maybe not in particular the same interests, but we all had this love and appreciation of something. And I feel like at comic conventions, there's just a really nice atmosphere of like belonging and welcoming. I think a lot of fans of Comic Con are probably people who have perhaps been pushed to the outskirts of society. So I think that does make us more kind of welcoming and inclusive just by default. And yeah, I started to cosplay, which was kind of one of my first more grown up experiences of sort of becoming someone else and getting the chance to dress as someone else.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was my first experience of kind of dressing as a male character and getting to kind of look in the mirror and see something which more aligned with how I felt inside. And having people kind of refer to me as the character I was playing. And yeah, having that just what felt like a safe space and a welcoming space to kind of experiment with the way I presented myself and the way I saw my gender identity. And I know that I have a lot of friends who have the same kind of experience. So a lot of my trans friends who are also into comics and stuff also say that like cosplay was something that kind of gave them the opportunity to maybe experiment a little bit and kind of unlock those feelings and realize what those feelings were. And I guess in a similar way, Dungeons and Dragons, it kind of allows you to be another person. And again, in a safe space where, it's okay to do that. And it's quite normal to do that, to play a character who's a different gender to you, or to experiment with playing a character who's maybe a different sexuality to you, or from a different background. So I think, again, that's a really safe space to experiment and try those things on in a way that feels, just accepted and safe.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I need to know more about your D&D Twitch group too. Some other heroes. I checked out the channel and I've got a pen to watch it later. I'm dipping my toe doesn't quite encapsulate what I'm trying to do personally at D&D because it's been a while, so I'm trying to learn 5th edition rules, and I'm DMing a campaign on Twitch, probably with a group of comics creators that myself and my co-host Jimmy know. So, tell me about the campaign that you're in. I need to know all these details because I'm trying to light speed, warp speed myself back up into being able to pull this off. So.
Sure. We are called Some Other Heroes, and we play every Sunday on Twitch, and we have past episodes on YouTube. And it's a D&D 5th edition game. It's a homebrew world made by our DM Chris, and it's set in a world where kind of a big magical war calamity happens, and there was no other way to save the world than to kind of break it up and send it into the sky. So now everyone lives on islands in the sky, and there's lots of sky ships and magic and mystery. It's very cool.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I definitely have to check this out. Well, one of the things that I love is your willingness to experiment with all these different things, be they games, cosplay, or words, in this kind of progression towards finding your true self. Words have a tremendous amount of power when you let them, for good or for ill. I know I've had quite a bit of difficulty personally embracing the concept and word disabled, which is something relatively new to me. I was terrified to ground myself in it at first. Let's say, younger queer questioning reader is listening to this, or even a parent, like your own, who they see as positive and supportive. What do you say to them to help them move through those words that can be challenging, right? Gay, queer, trans, all these things that sometimes can feel quite loaded, especially when you utter them to somebody else.
Yeah. It's a complicated one. I think, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, but I think we generally as a society have this idea that coming out as a queer person means like sharing your identity with everyone around you, and it's seen as this like big one-off thing. I think the process of coming out really starts with coming out to yourself and starting to acknowledge and find those terms that you feel like fit you, and come to accept those terms. Because I think all of us have this kind of degree of internalized homophobia, transphobia, ableism. So I think sometimes it is difficult to overcome that and come to terms with those terms. I know I fairly recently have been diagnosed with ADHD and autism, and I had to unpack a lot of kind of internalized ableism about using the term neurodivergent or disabled, or thinking of myself differently. And it is a process, but I would say the best thing to do is probably to talk to other people in your community. And I think the best advice I could give anyone is to kind of find your people, and find people who are either going through the same thing as you, or who have gone through the same thing as you, and just find people you can have open conversations with. And it's okay to feel, I think it's normal to feel those kind of feelings of internalized shame, or it's not necessarily, it doesn't make you a bad person. I think we all have those kind of walls that we have to break down, and that's not our fault. That's just the product of society as it is today, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting to see for me, because I'm a spectrum person myself, but I had a friend online who was talking about his child was just diagnosed, and he put something out there on Twitter, kind of like this help, right? I need some positive, reinforcement here. But it's so amazing now, these differences between, like, when I was growing up, we just didn't have the words for it. And it was so nice to just be able to be like, yes, here's me. This is who I am. You're going to be fine. They're going to be fine. There's help there, right? You just seek it out. And those people that help us along the way. It's funny how, when you read something, Homebody, for me, the odd thing that I kind of stuck on was your mom singing Annie Lennox in the kitchen, because Little Bird is one of those things that I don't belt out myself. I'll sing it very softly. And I'm sure, in comparison to your mom, and really anyone else for that matter, I do a really poor job because I can't sing. And we didn't have much music playing when I was a kid. And then it's funny, then I heavily respond the other direction to it, and ran off to work in the music industry for a decade and a half at 21. So, but yeah, how much did having the support along the way help you?
Yeah, immeasurably. I think I'm quite lucky in that I have a supportive family who have not always known the right thing to say immediately, but they are always very willing to learn. And I think at the bottom, the bottom line is that they love me and want me to be happy. So whatever, however I do that, that's what's important to them.
Yeah.
And I also have a lot of supportive friends who are also LGBT or neurodivergent. So I'm lucky to have had those kind of communities to support me.
All right, let's take a quick break. Hey, comics fam. Indie comic book publisher Band of Bars just got a level up and announced it is now a cooperative. This heralds a new era for them, including a partnership with Dauntless Stories. And they added several new members to the ownership group. Marcus Jimenez is now Chief Operating Officer, Brent Fisher takes on the role of Chief Diversity Officer, and Joey Galvez is introduced as Head of Kickstarter Ops and Social Media Manager, which is sure to increase their capabilities overall as a publisher. And it further promotes their mission statement of advancing representation, inclusion, and diversity in the medium. They also established a new board of directors to help chart the new path of their journey. With new projects in the works like Alas Goodbye dropping in June, Unbroken soon launching on Kickstarter, and Pawn coming up with Dauntless, stay tuned to this space for more exciting news from the growing Bards family. Let's get back to the show. Well, I want to get into kind of how you structure things as an artist. Because the layouts were very interesting in the book. They're very open. There's a flow to them that your eye doesn't get stuck on any one thing for too long, and it flows. The analogy I would make is there's like a water. It's very organic in terms of how it moves. So you use swirls and you use these horizontal waves a lot across the page. Is that a feature of your own style or something you kind of gravitated towards for this project specifically?
I think it's a little bit of both. I often do have like the little sparklies, and like the wavy lines are good ways to like fill space that I don't really know what to do with.
Okay. So cheat. Gotcha. No problem. It looks good.
In the book, I did want to use that sort of as a running. There's several kind of running visual themes in the book. So there's kind of the main one of like the Theo character with the house as the body.
Yeah.
So throughout the book, there's several times when either I will look in the mirror, or sometimes other people will be represented as houses as well. And it's just kind of to like a visual metaphor of moments where I'm starting to kind of become more at home, or when I start to, like, the first time I get like a gender affirming haircut, the end scene is me looking in the mirror with my good haircut and like the body of a house. And I think like the kind of wavy line, sort of rainbow sparkles, I wanted to use that throughout as well in a kind of similar way, just to show, kind of give emphasis to those moments of like either being supported by the people around me or coming into my own kind of power and my identity.
Okay. Is the background in more game design? How do you see that play itself out in the panels? Because it's a lot of people, especially I've noticed with more of their first big project, right? I don't know why everybody seems to want to take on graphic novels, but that's what y'all do. So it seems like terrifying to me, but
it kind of was, honestly.
I can't imagine it. Like I'm trying to get a little bit do a little bit of comics writing, and like, oh my, how do I fill out 22 pages, let alone 200? But anyway, not trying to cause more anxiety. The layouts, I'm just curious about how that game design plays itself out structurally, because there's not like a 5 or 6 panel, in your work. That's I think where that organic read comes in, because you move quickly because you don't get locked into this rhythm of sequence, I guess.
Yeah, I actually also took a lot of inspiration from picture books.
Okay.
So I really love picture books. I think the design and the illustration for picture books is really cool. And I don't think we should stop reading things like that just because we're not children anymore.
I agree.
I really was inspired by the way that font is used in picture books, and often it's, instead of being like, here's a picture and here's some words, they're kind of much more tied together in their design. So I think there's a lot of pages in Homebody that don't have any panels at all, and I really wanted the words to be sort of part of the image rather than to be separate, because I think there's a lot you can add in terms of like tone or impact just by the way that you arranged the words on the page. So I'd say, yeah, probably my main influence was picture books, actually.
Okay. It's funny how
just to throw a curveball at you.
No, that's okay. Like Eric Carle I love Eric Carle. I will never tire of Eric Carle's work ever.
Yeah,
just absolutely amazing stuff. Well, the coloring aids to your layout choices as well. Unless I'm way off, the palette is restricted to the color of the trans flag. Am I on there? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Absolutely. Okay. That's what
Hooray,
I thought.
It worked.
Yeah. Well, as a student of color myself and as an aspiring comics colorist, I'm always curious about, kind of motivations behind restricted color palettes. Obviously here, motivation is pretty straightforward, but when did you decide on it? Did you first draw things out, or?
Very early on,
Okay.
we had discussions about, in terms of production, I guess, quite boringly. There was questions about whether it was going to be in full color or in just black and white. And I think from the get-go, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do in terms of the color scheme, but I knew I didn't want it to be just black and white, because I am a very colorful person. I love color, especially in my artwork. I love the relationships between different colors and the differences that can have on an image. It's really fascinating to me. So I knew I wanted to have colors, but I really do enjoy working in a limited palette. I think kind of in what may seem counterintuitive, I think it gives a lot of freedom by having limitations, because if you have some restrictions, you're then kind of forced to find ways to work around them. And I think that gives, I find it inspiring in terms of like creativity, because I think I just like to creatively solve problems. And one of the big things that I had a lot of fun trying to figure out was how to render pride flags in just 2 colors.
Yeah.
So yeah, I ended up taking a lot of inspiration from there's a printing process called risograph printing. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah.
So I took a lot of inspiration from that. I've done some risograph printing before, but basically it's just a way of getting more than two colors by using only two colors. And in terms of like the opacity that you layer each color on top of each other, you can get additional tones. So although the two colors we used were pink and blue, the overlay of those can produce different shades of purple, darker pinks and lighter blues, etc. So it was really cool to kind of figure out how to do all those things.
Yeah, my brain was going back and being like, I've never asked that question before, but does the pride flag translate into CMYK? Like I've never tried that. So
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was fun to try and, because obviously contextually, if you're reading a book like Homebody and you see a flag with several stripes that are different colors, you're going to assume that's the rainbow pride flag, right? But then there are scenes, like there's a scene at my local pride where myself and a friend paint pride flags on each other's faces. And so there's like a picture that we had with all of the different pride flags. So like the non-binary flag, the bisexual flag. So trying to make them all look like they're retrospective, like different flags, but only using those two colors was fun, but kind of challenging.
I'm picturing more challenging than fun in the moment. In the
moment. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah. The layout and the color and everything like that, compositionally, it's great because you're able to focus on what matters. If that makes sense, you don't have a lot of topography in the background that kind of busies things. And I think that really is what made it feel so organic, and it flows and the ideas connect in a really nice way. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Well, towards the end of there's a statement that reads, "There's no one way to be transgender." And I've asked this before about kind of the pressure of writing queer characters, and we alluded to before, even like when we started the podcast, how much things have changed over 2.5 years just in what I'm reading and stuff. It takes several years to make a graphic novel. Did you ever feel any of that pressure, or did you feel a need to check a box of any kind, if you will, with how you're writing it?
I guess not, in a way that this is my story and it's about me. So I'm only writing it from my perspective. So I did kind of want to, I think I do reference quite a lot in the book that, there's no one way to be non-binary. There's no one way to be transgender. Like, this is how it is for me, but it's not necessarily like this for everyone. And it's okay if you don't feel the way that everyone else feels. I think, particularly as trans people, I think I do feel, or I have felt pressure to prove myself, or in certain ways.
Sure.
And I think there's a pressure on trans people certainly to feel a certain way about their body, or to have a certain level of discomfort or dislike for their own body. And that's not true for everyone, particularly non-binary people, because a lot of non-binary people are kind of existing in this gray area. And so I wanted to just be careful about making sure that that was the message that I put across. Like, this is my experience, but this isn't necessarily the only experience.
Okay. And opening the lens up, you're a younger creative. I've asked this before, like, have we broken the glass ceiling where queer writers and artists don't need to modify anymore for cis straight readers?
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay.
I think the more types and varieties of queer stories that we see is only going to benefit everyone, not just people in the LGBT community, but also cis and straight readers as well. I think that comics and books in general are a great way to kind of put yourself in someone else's shoes. I think it's Philip Pullman that says that the books are like an empathy engine. So yeah, it's not just important for, obviously it's very important for LGBT people to be able to see themselves represented in stories, but I think it's just as important for cis and straight readers to have access to that as well, to allow them to kind of, empathize with experiences that they may not have come across in their own lives.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, lately I've gotten away from asking for advice because it's always gone dark places. But I'm going to return to that today because, Homebody in effect is like a blueprint, in a way for questioning young person or an ally, a friend or a parent. They just finished the book and set it on the desk. And are there any additional like words of advice or, pieces of wisdom that you'd like to share beyond what's in the pages themselves?
I think my main want for this book, I think I had two kind of main motivators in mind, and one of them was for trans and non-binary or questioning young people to read and see themselves and feel understood in those pages. But I also really wanted it to be accessible for people who are cisgender, who are perhaps supporting a family member, a friend, or just generally want to know more about the kinds of things that queer people may be going through.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really hope that the book allows people to kind of start those conversations. So my advice would be to have conversations, to use the book as a starting point for a conversation. If there's things that you still don't understand or you're unsure about, use the book to start some conversations. I think that would be really cool.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there were things in there, despite the fact that my best friend is trans, or things that I wasn't aware of, like, and I guess I just never put a name on them, like a dead name, right? Like we went through that, but I didn't have a word for it, and it added a lot of context for me just to be, oh, I should know this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what have you been up to lately? Any new projects on the horizon that you can talk about?
I am starting to write my second graphic novel,
Okay.
which will be out in 2026, I think. Yes. That's going to be another sort of personal book I'm going to be writing based on my experiences as someone who is autistic and ADHD, but late diagnosed. So I guess it's kind of a similar thing. Like growing up, I didn't really understand why I thought the way I did or why I had problems doing things in the same way as other people.
Sure.
And for a long time, I thought that was because there was something wrong with me. But turns out I just didn't have this kind of integral knowledge about myself. And again, I'm writing it for sort of similar reasons to writing Homebody, really just to kind of get those experiences out into the world, just in case someone else needs to hear them and then realizes, oh, that kind of sounds like me actually, because I didn't know. The only reason I discovered that I had ADHD and autism is because of other people sharing their experiences. But I think I had, like a lot of us, I had a very kind of limited understanding of what being neurodivergent was and what that looked like. So I think it's really important for us to share our experiences because that will help other people. And to help people who aren't neurodivergent, who want to understand what that might be like.
Okay. Well, where can people find you online?
You can find me. My website is theoblueillustration.com, and that has links to all the places you can find me on social media if you wish to.
All right. Well, we'll throw it up in the show notes so everybody can easily find that and track you down if you want them to. Who knows? Lately, social media is a dumpster fire. But
yeah.
Well, Homebody is out on shelves now. I encourage you to pick this one up. Everybody who's listening, it's quite compelling. This personal story of self-discovery and hope. And I'll thank you, Theo, for being brave enough to put yourself out there into the world and living your most authentic self. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on today. Well, this is Byron O'Neill, and on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti, happy Pride Month, and which I'll continue to beat my drum again and say if you want more diversity and representation in comics and beyond, you need to show the corporations that you need it and you need to buy it. So do that, and thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody. This is Byron O'Neill, one of your hosts of the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by Comic Book Yeti. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. It lets us know how we are doing, and more importantly, how we can improve. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner, maybe you would enjoy our sister podcast, Into the Comics Cave. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.